You know, I'm a startup guy, but a startup guy that somehow fell in love with the banking industry, the community banking industry, the small little banks that virtually no one cares about, but it actually is a very material industry, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So start off with a bit about continuity and add a little color as we go. So what continuity does is we help the smaller banks, so the First Counties of the world, the Newtown Savings Bank, Rockville Savings Bank, there are about 14,000 of these folks around the country, and they have the challenge, like everyone else, of dealing with the government. The government has lots and lots of regulations. They have examiners that come and look in every crack and crevice, and it's a real challenge. So I had a personal experience with this. In my prior business, we did security for this same market, and we had the government come in every year to inspect us because we were very successful doing it, and every year the bar got higher and higher and higher about what we had to do until there were 36 people from the government in for 3.5 months a year consuming all of our resources. And I'm a technologist, entrepreneur. I'm like, well, Jesus, like how do people deal with this stuff? And I'm like, well, there must be a methodical way to handle this. And so began to ask our clients, how do you deal with this? And the answer was Word, Excel, and cocktail napkins. There was no way of dealing with this. So it was literally like the paper ledger moment when Excel didn't exist. There was no such thing as a financial management system. Today, most of these banks live without a compliance management system. And so, as we talk about my background, really it's all organized around seeing a black hole. Like, you look around at the market and you're like, holy crap, there's something that should really exist right there, and all the forces are pulling towards it, but nothing is yet there. So the community banks, they power Main Street. They do 60% of all small business lending, all loans to Main Streets across the country. 60% of them are done by these folks, even though they represent under 15% of all the assets. So up here in the Northeast, it's harder to see. You get out to the heartland, you see it. The regulations are absolutely killing them. They're still highly manual, hundreds of changes and big fines. So this is really complicated because we have the government on one side and really what represents small to medium businesses. These banks are, the smallest credit union I've seen is 2 employees in a closet. Maybe it's a couple dozen, but these are not sophisticated organizations, yet they're up against the full force and weight of the government. Go to the next slide here. So to put some numbers on that, again, 13,000 plus community banks and credit unions, they are up against 14,000 citations in the Code of Federal Regulations. 14,000 separate things that they have to somehow prove that they're doing. But depending upon what products they offer, what markets they occupy, their size, a series of different characteristics, they're not sure which 14,000. And again, in the absence of any system, how do you deal with that? Those things change over 300 times a year. 2015, 329 changes, nearly a change a day. And this, so we just have energy. Many of us are small to medium business owners. Imagine just the goalposts moving every day. You come in, your desk is in a different place. It's crazy. So what this means is that these organizations, these small folks, are spending over $18 billion just trying to deal with this stuff, and that's a hellacious burden that's growing at 15% annually because, as you can imagine, you take something large and complex and jack with it continuously. So this is the landscape that we came into, and so we looked at it. Traditionally, professional service firms have been dealing with this, charging by the hour. It's at this point that I have to, warn consultants. It's when you're dealing with a complex problem, charging by the hour in an organizations that are this normalized, it should be criminal. We as Homo sapiens are granted with these big brains and awesome thumbs and a spirit of innovation. And if that's all you can come up with, and I'll rant a little bit on that, and someone's like, well, you make them sound like, like they're prostitutes. So no, I don't want to disparage the world's oldest trade. They're far worse than that. So what we needed to do was build something that filled this void, because these small to medium banks are dying under this weight. The Federal Reserve, the chairman out in St. Louis, gave the alternative to small and medium banks: grow, merge, or die. And it's like, there's got to be a better answer than that, and there absolutely is. So at Continuity, we'll keep moving here. This was just a piece that we put together in 2012 for the election to show that, everyone's guilty. The last deregulatory cycle began under Clinton, so any thesis that somehow a different party is going to change everything, it's bound between about 150 changes per year and the low water marks, but these are cyclical, and it doesn't matter who's in office. So in looking at that, we started to think very hard. Okay, how do we change? Because the entire industry is focused on, again, consultants, AKA ambulance chasers, going after all this money. And we needed to pivot the industry's thinking to be thinking about this in economic terms, because literally no one was. Even the big, $18 billion, and no one's thinking about the dollars. It's like the most insane thing ever. Banks, yeah, go figure. It's like, you guys can count. I know you can count. So one of our inventions was the Bank Compliance Index, which now has been in the Wall Street Journal for about the last 2.5 years. Was on the homepage of The Economist and other things, where we simply quantified it. We did the unthinkable. We counted. And so in a given year, and this is going way back, there were 66 regulatory changes in a given period that ultimately consumed about 500 hours inside of every organization in the country. So it's by pivoting the conversation has really elevated Continuity's voice in this matter, because there was absolutely no leadership in the sector. You'll find with this and others, my bailiwick is inventing new sectors. That's what I like doing. So moving on here. This is just a little bit of look at the market. Very, very simple. This is out of the investor deck. You have manual point solutions at one side, and yes, these people still buy documents. They buy pieces of paper with things printed on them and count that as a solution. So really, the world that we walked into was there were complete offerings to deal with all of these compliance challenges, but they were called human beings, and they don't scale very well. Nor do they standardize anything. And there was automation, but it was really in the point solution realm. So at Continuity, we said, hey, there's this opportunity up in the upper corner there to build a compliance management system, which is something that had been talked about by the regulators, but more in the context of a system of government than a computer system. So we needed to invent that, and that's what we set about doing. So the key breakthrough was really going from manual, inconsistent, expensive, poorly documented to automated and standardized. And standardizing was really the key, because no one had actually thought about, hey, can we build a taxonomy around all of these 15,000 regulations? Can we break them down into their component parts such that we can tell when one of those 329 changes happen what it means without a lawyer? Because lawyers slow things down. They never add value. Steve Cooper's gone now, so I can diss lawyers. It allowed us to automate, standardize, and get to one-to-many, and ultimately go for our dream of persistent compliance. Because we're like, if we solve this problem right, when a change happens in Washington, we can flip a couple levers, turn a couple knobs, and thousands of institutions can instantaneously be in the new state of compliance. That would be awesome. We could take that 18 billion and probably drop it to about 5. And to me, as an entrepreneur, that's the fun part. How do we collapse markets? Because Moore's Law, everything should be, way better, way faster, way cheaper. And if you're just trying to, take a share of a market instead of collapse a market, to my mind, we're not done thinking. So this ultimately serves to lower the price by 70%, and that's all awesome and a good idea. But when we first launched, going up against 15,000, citations in the federal regulations, you can imagine as a startup, where the hell do you start? So we just started one at a time, pieced them together, and high in 2008, on the success of Apple's App Store, we're like, hey, let's sell them an app at a time. Like, that would be awesome. And the news, the analysts, the intelligentsia around the industry thought it was fantastic. We were up on the stage at Finovate, a wonderful conference. Everyone thought we were geniuses. We were sitting there looking at our accounts, waiting for the swipes to come in, and had the shocking realization that app stores don't work without phones in pockets. And so too much choice led to a great period where you see this little bump right here, which is about 50, it was a long time before the first dollars of revenue came in. It was a very long drought. We had absolutely outthought ourselves. The bankers couldn't imagine getting something very valuable that simply, that easily. It couldn't work. And so we had to go into our first pivot, and our first pivot was to shrink their choices and literally just add a zero to the prices. We just 10x the price. Everything was 10x the price, and it proved to be a good move. Too many choices. I was a technologist by background, not a marketer, so everyone can laugh at me now. But giving them less choice really worked, and started to get traction building in the organization, and starting to ramp. It was actually, if you count backwards, it was 54 months to the first $1 million in revenue, and launching, a bad model into the abyss of the financial crisis, where these organizations have existed for 100 to 200 years. They exist because they don't spend money when they don't have to. They go into turtle mode. And so as someone who had a great deal of success, this was a very scary time. I like to say this is a time where I didn't let anyone else come into my board meetings with me. It was just me and the board staring at each other. Started to come out of the gate, started to get the market traction, get enough users to drive the feedback system, and found that those narrower choices were good. But on to the next slide. We came around a corner and said, well, what if we just give them a choice? What if we just let the market buy a compliance management system? What I now affectionately refer to as the Death Star of compliance, and it was good. It was a very good choice. We'll flip here. Again, continued to build, continued to scale the revenue. Got a lot more money per unit, and it was good. But still, as a startup, you're always looking at the unit effectiveness of your sales and marketing teams. And it still wasn't there. It still wasn't, we were growing nicely, doing all that, but when software as a service business, we're always thinking about the CAC ratio, the client acquisition cost, and it still wasn't running where it needed to be. And the Death Star was too big. It was made the same mistake twice. Happy to say I've tested the mistake again. And so we now have moved to a few simple choices. And again, in a world with compliance where there are 15,000 things that you're dealing with that are changing, getting to simple is really hard. And so we finally got there and got to a few simple choices of a regulatory change management system, a suite of tools, some remote audits, each thing independently understandable, intelligible, tangible to the banker, and what we've seen has been really, really exciting, because by getting to this simple, talking to Drew earlier, we've watched our sales cycles go from 6 to 8 months of wrestling to 6 to 8 weeks, because they're simple. Now, when we broke up the product from the Death Star, we said, okay, well, let's just separate it and attribute some percentage of the price. Well, when we broke it up into these 4 pieces versus the 1 piece, what we looked at, the pieces were too cheap. And we're like, nah, we made this mistake before. So then we just tripled the price of everything. And as it turns out, it ends up selling for about the same price as the Death Star for each of these. And again, the sales cycles collapse, and it's all good. So it's really been exciting through 15, end of 15, and the first quarter so far, because it's a profound change. It's a profound change in how we market, our conversations, and again, when you're inventing an entirely new sector, my point is this can take some time, and it's not straightforward. So this is a slide that I give to new employees. While all of that is great and those lines are steep, we're only here because this is an $18 billion industry, and there's a lot of damage to do, and we're having fun so far. So along the way, won a lot of awards, and it's very exciting to get these in Connecticut. As Peter was saying, the startup scene is only so interesting. When I raised my first round of capital for second round, first round capital participated in the second round. Go figure. And I was raising capital, and the kid that went in before me was the founder of Uber, and the other kid was the kid from Airbnb. So I'm like, why, I don't even know why the fat old guy is here, but it was a testament to the difference between consumer and B2B, because in the B2B space it can be a very long road, again, to cracking new markets. But it's really what excites me is that out in the world there's this amazing innovation happening, but there are these other sectors that are literally stuck in the 1970s. I go and you meet with the consultant, and he takes out the book, and you're like, he could be a monk in like the 12th century, and it would be the exact same experience. So there are all of these things that are immediately around us that represent amazing business opportunities that aren't yet another the Facebook for whomever, and so it's great to get the accolades, and we actually won again the best place to work, which is the event tonight that I'm not at. My team is at, so it's very exciting. But that's the continuity story. We continue to roll in New Haven, and loving the as I share with everyone, the entire state of Connecticut is 60% of the size of Metro Houston. So Stamford and New Haven are just two different neighborhoods. But I have been a technologist kind of my whole life. I was, I feel very, very lucky. My buddies who were dads were science teachers, so I had a wooden Apple back in '77, and that. So folks actually at Norwalk Hospital said, hey, do you know anything about computers? And I'm like, yeah, sure, yeah, yes. And as it turned out, we ended up connecting all of the hospitals in the state into this unified network where the security infrastructure was centralized. And so it was this baptism by fire where no one knew anything about the internet or how these things worked, so we were all learning it in real time. And so got done with that project. It was awesome, and got poached by a consulting firm. So continued to do that sort of infrastructure work for General Electric and Gartner Group and different things. But it was gnawing on me about, well, this unified infrastructure that we built for all the hospitals, couldn't we just build the same thing and plug random people into it, plug other companies into it, create a security utility? Like, that would be awesome. And so I was working with a consulting firm who was, doing consulting and selling hardware, complaining about the plunging margins in hardware. And I'm like, hey, like, what if we do this? Right. And said, no, that would cost too much money. I said, well, I want to do it. And so started what would be perimeter eSecurity in my basement with a couple of servers on a baker's rack. And first client was Norwalk Rehab and Norwalk Rehabilitation Company. And so was born what would later be known as security in the cloud. Right.
So there were early phases of the cloud before everything became the cloud.
Yes.
And so explaining that was pretty complicated, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. There were lots of analogies, no words. Eventually, this idea of a managed security service provider, an MSSP, emerged, and we're like, well, okay, we're security, and we certainly provide stuff, but an MSSP at the time was more people in a room watching packets, so it was more sort of this hybrid human augmentation model than ours was a tech-based utility. So, but we were thankful that there was some category, but the analysts all came in and said, well, you make too much money, your margins are too high, your churn is too low, and we're like, well, but these are all good, right? Like, well, but you're not in the right category. And so the emergence of software as a service, SaaS, was really that, and security in the cloud were real blessings because the industry finally had words for us.
Right, and now the term RegTech sort of emerged to help you categorize what you're doing at Continuity.
No, it's we're seeing the whole thing happen over again because there's, again, as hopefully I communicated, it's a very large and dynamic problem. But no one had a word for it yet. So it's still mainly lawyers and stuff. So a RegTech is an emerging concept out of Europe, and I'm very bullish on trying to pull it across the pond as aggressively as possible because it serves to these terms serve to organize the industry's thinking. So.
Right. So a lot of the startups that we work with, what they're thinking about is how do they get to customer one? How do they find that first customer that's gonna buy something? Yeah. And you showed us that with Continuity, you made a long bet and you were pretty sure you'd be right, and it turns out you were right, and you'll be more right going forward. But let's talk about perimeter and the first customer and how you service them and sort of realize that you had something there.
Sure.
Otherwise, if you hadn't had that first customer, you would not have really been in the business.
Yeah, no. It was, it was very, as I said, I was at the consulting firm, and I had, I worked for Norwalk Rehab as a consultant, and so it was really that first client was kind of baked into the deal. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go do this, and I'm gonna pay the consulting firm back a little spiff on the revenue, and so you manage to do the horse trading to get to customer one, because customer one is really, really hard. At Continuity, I actually just tried to buy customer number one, but couldn't. I kissed a lot of frogs, and there are a lot of small entrepreneurial companies that just, even though this year they're 500,000, next year it's going to be 37 million, and you can't quite get to a deal. Right. But the real breakthrough on the client side with Perimeter was we somehow tripped into two clients. One is Fujicolor Film, who had the back-end wholesale photo finishing. Excuse me, and Mediacom, which would end up being the 8th largest cable television company in the country, and actually the successor to my first company had morphed into an accounting firm accounting software reseller, and had sold them and said, well, you need a network to run this stuff, so here's my buddy at Perimeter. And so I went into, I remember doing the due diligence with the CFO at Fujicolor Film, and he looked at the financials, and again, I had Norwalk Rehab and a couple of companies, and he says, are these in thousands or millions? I said, well, they're in dollars. And I said, I understand my business looks like a lemonade stand to you, but but we're going in the right direction, and for some bizarre reason, they said yes. And which leads to another funny story, because they said yes, and I'm like, oh crap. Now I need like $1.2 million worth of equipment to facilitate this. And so at the time, everyone's handing out lease dollars. Cisco and Nortel is, they're all trying to get their gear out in the world. And so Nortel, I do the paperwork, and I'm approved. Shockingly, I'm approved because my financials were a train wreck, and personally and professionally. So got the equipment, got it deployed all around the country, and then found out that the paperwork was done under the name Cybergenics, which was a $1 billion company out on Long Island. And I sent in the corrected spelling, and they're like, "Oh my God!" So what would become the cybersecurity arm of British Aerospace is owed to a clerical error. Because I told them I didn't have the money to go get the gear, so here's the first check, and they're the clients, and thankfully that worked.
And then you, it's a fantastic story. It's all, it's about luck. It's about being persistent, and then leveraging. I assume those clients. It's a lot easier to sell if you've got Fuji as a client.
Yeah, it was, but it was tough. I mean, obviously, you have the whole revenue concentration problem because
Right.
for a long time, I mean, they were 75-80% of our revenue, and they're like, "That's risky." I'm like, "We know.
Yeah.
Do you want us to tell them to go away?" I don't. So they were the most strategic tactical money I've ever had. But we ended up, we couldn't find traction in the sales cycle again, and we're trying, but ultimately no one cared about security until we wandered into what was then New Haven Savings Bank, and Bob Dorff writes about this pivot because they said, "Well, we actually don't want anything you do other than the security." And we said, "Well, we don't sell it that way. We sell it as one thing." I'm the one thing problem again. But they said, "Well, if you do it just the way we want, then there are 20,000 at the time other banks that want it just the way we do." And so we in the absence of better alternatives, we did that in about a week, and 18 months later had 70% market share in banking in Connecticut. Wow. And it was just, so.
So, had you taken on your venture money before that, or?
Yes. So a number of swings at Connecticut Innovations, wandering in with my Birkenstocks and backpack and getting thrown out. Eventually, as we started to get traction, brought in adult supervision, and got CI. CI was an investor very early on, and some others, and so. But ended up, I mean, we built what would approach a $100 million business. I mean, the initial capital was in the $5-6 million range.
That's amazing. So that's great return for CI and all your investors.
Yes. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Made the second raise easier.
Yeah. So you sold out most of your portion of that in 2007.
Yeah, 2007 we sold a third of the business to Goldman Sachs and Bessemer, raised capital to do a big acquisition and do some things, and so it was really in my role there as chief technology officer and dealing with all the regulatory pressure. A little bit of money in the pocket, and I had this burning need to solve this compliance issue. So decided it would be more fun to go do that.
Right. Great. So and it was a whole lot easier to raise money with the next
Yes.
next business.
Yeah, you pay back 10x. It's the meetings change dramatically.
Any questions from the audience? I've got a bunch more. Could you come up and just get on the mic because we're recording? Do you mind? Give us your name.
Andrew, you keep saying that you're a technologist. Can you talk about what you mean by that? Like, do you code, or what is that?
So I am a ham-fisted coder. I really a systems engineer, Unix guy by background, network infrastructure, a lot of stuff on that side. So it was really, routing, splicing packets, doing, that level of stuff. No sophisticated coding. All of my coding was like Perl and shell scripts and, glomming stuff together. So much more of a systems guy.
We spoke earlier about your academic career. You've sort of bounced around a little bit. from starting at junior colleges, ending up at UMass Amherst.
Yep.
Why don't you talk about that just a little bit? 'Cause I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. Very always raised by an insanely idealistic mother. So only a idealist studies philosophy, right? Fascinated on about what goes on in one's head and how that works. Their program is very logic oriented, and then the cognitive linguistics. And really, for me, a breakthrough in my education was a book by Thomas Kuhn, Structure of Scientific Revolution, on the nonlinearity of sort of major step changes, and watching the way the tech was rolling out, and each sequential change. And someone's like, "I've been in the industry for 20 years." I'm like, "Nah, it's not like." No one is anymore. It's
right.
a series of like 3 to 4 year chunks,
right.
and the trick is to get up to speed real quick.
Exactly.
And so anyway, that was academically, that was my background, and always had challenges in school because I came to find out later I read at a second grade level because of a muscular issue in my eye, so I pattern match. And so I read the first sentence and the last sentence and figure out if there's any logical incongruity between the two, and if there is, go back. So it's been a high order coping mechanism.
It's remarkable, and we were talking that there's a lot of documentation about startup leaders and other high achievers with learning disabilities, dyslexia especially. You hear it a lot. I just think it's fascinating. I think you feel like it's been really a blessing to your style.
Yeah. It's I think again it's a combination of that plus looking back through the last 15,000 years of human thought. You realize that the only thing that I can bet on is that I'm wrong, and we're all wrong. And there's some way that the world ought be that's becoming available to us. And from an entrepreneurial perspective, like that context has just been fantastic. Now it leads, the timing is always,
right.
The timing is a rub because it's really easy to get the timing wrong, and you need the stamina to last. But it really, I'm so thankful. After a couple of beers, I'll assert that the only undergraduate majors that should exist are economics and philosophy. That's,
English major here, so.
Well, okay.
And any more questions from the crowd? Can you come up on the mic, Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. I half expected the backstory to continuity to be that you were at one point responsible for all of the compliance in a small local community bank, and therefore understood the need for the automated service and the compliance tool. Right. And you talk about identifying a black hole in the market that needs to be filled. If you don't have that industry knowledge in the inside awareness of that hole and that void that needs to be filled, how do you spot that opportunity in the market, for one? How do you develop the technical skill set around, you say get up to speed real quick with a compliance system that befuddles thousands of these banks?
Right.
And then how do you maintain with all of the 3,000 plus changes or whatever that go on an annual basis?
It's firstly, I lived at the other end of the regulator's spear at Perimeter, so that was how it it became acutely aware to me, because I was being poked by on a repeated basis. In terms of finding things, one. Because now I'm on the board of the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute and an angel investor, and so I see a lot of different things. Listen, they're all around, like they're everywhere. Like the remnants of human stupidity are everywhere. So just assume it's there and start poking. And in terms of organizing things and sort of coming up to speed. I learned very early on in logic, and I do this a lot with employees and mentoring students. Is the first thing you do is fold the piece of paper in half, divide your universe in half, then divide it again, and then at some point it won't make sense to divide it. But coming up with organizational systems around previously poorly understood things. to me is an insanely fun thing to do, because they again, you start poking and they start to give way, but most folks don't think about them as a system, and they are like, all of these things are byproducts of humans, and humans, whether typically not wittingly, will behave in some sort of patternistic way. And so when we're talking about banking and you're talking about 15,000 things, you back up and you say, okay, well, like, there are 15,000 things, but for the love of God, how many things do banks do? Like, they take deposits, and they make loans, and they have credit cards, and like, there's a finite set of things that are being acted against. And so you take any given model, and if it's super complex, you flip it around and say, okay, well, is the complexity at the sort of that which is being operated on, or the operation itself, or the operator? And trying to find that, and I've found that there are very few problems that appear complex initially that don't give way pretty quick. Now the trick is finding sort of the patterns for when they change state and things of that nature. But that's again, I count myself incredibly blessed, being a student of logic, because the business majors never figure this stuff out. The computer science guys, don't typically figure it out. It's figuring out types of things, because that's really when you're looking at moving for anything from an antiquated modality where it was documents or some other unstructured thing to data, you have to get to some sort of organizational system, and I think the world is ripe with opportunities for that transformation in countless areas. I mean, the 18 billion. This is just compliance for community banks. Right. Regulation costs small to medium business in the United States nearly $1 trillion. So it's the opportunities just in this sector are crazy.
Well, we've got a few big bank people in the audience. I'm sure they're spending a whole lot of money on compliance. Frank?
Andy, you'd mentioned 2008, right? That's when you started Continuity. Now, I remember 2008.
Yep.
I was with Dun & Bradstreet. I had like 3 community banks as clients in Connecticut. They were running scared, I mean, in a tremendous way. So you're out in 2008 now, rolling your product out initially.
Yep.
That's kind of what I want to know. How did you, was it the connections that you had, maybe doing the networking that you had, or how did you acquire that first client with Continuity?
Well, as you saw from the revenue graph, I didn't, not much anyhow. I had, tons of relationships, but to your point, it was hard. I mean, our first client was actually a telesales, the Atlantic Bank in Bluffton, South Carolina. So it's, they went into turtle mode, and, if I had to do it all over again, I would have taken the invested capital, put it in a barrel, let everyone go, and said, hey, let's get back together in 2010 or whenever we start to see the thing warm up, because, I wish I had that capital back. It would have been.
So you got to know all the trade shows.
Yeah. Yes.
You got to meet some people.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been really challenging.
Yeah, no, it was insane. I mean, I always, talk about it as just clinging to the rocks, and it's again, with the good fortune of prior success and the ability to invest my own capital, we were able to persist. But it was actually a gentleman, one of our attorneys back at Perimeter, Kevin McGovern out of Greenwich, was always like, keep the runway long, and it was just very, very sound advice that you got to know when to fold them and just keep your cost structure as low as humanly possible, because if you haven't figured it out, or the market just isn't there. But as it turns out, I think that the fact that we saw compliance as a problem in 2007, is making us look clairvoyant now, but it was a near-death experience.
Right. Now, when you started, how many employees did you have at Continuity when you first couple of years?
3.
3.
4, yeah.
And when did you start adding staff? After the first sale, or?
No, I mean, it was not after the first sale, because again, the first sales were these app things.
Right.
And so it was really getting into 2011. So we were in the incubator up in New Haven,
right.
the CTech
Right.
incubator. So we were just plugging along in an office and waiting for some some major step function change to happen, because that was it. So in 2011, we had the technology, but we didn't have the regulatory expertise on staff. So I knew it was a problem. I just didn't really know how to solve it. And so we ended up, acquiring a former examiner, and they had a little business and a newsletter and some things. So it added the credibility and the content that we needed to plug into our technology. The Gartner Cool Vendor Award, we won that because it's really the hybrid of human expertise into technology in a very integrated way, so that there's no. Peter Coffey at Salesforce talks about, the ultimate, software as a service. The next step and the last step is service as software.
Right.
And Gartner sees us as kind of the one of the first and best examples of that.
Right. In the marketing world, HubSpot is the one who
Bingo.
crushes that.
Bingo.
Because they deliver best practice advice on SEO and marketing on a monthly basis, and it's the same advice again and again and again. It's an interesting model. So I love your thought about sort of vacuuming out the fluff in a market or a sector.
Yeah.
That wasn't your philosophy when you started Perimeter, but you sort of you were just trying to solve a point problem at that point.
Well, it was really that it was still a a problem where the technologists were out there selling routers and firewalls and circuits, and then they layer on top of it management, and so they sort of cobble together the piece parts, and I'm looking at that going like, well, why do they really want the piece parts? Like, they don't really want the piece. Oh, no, they buy the piece parts. Like, I understand they buy the piece parts because they have to buy the piece parts.
They just want to feel safe.
Well, yeah, and they want to be able to communicate safely and operate in this new world. And I'm like, well, if we just promise them that, like, let's give them a way to buy that which they want. And so it was really again, moving from a technical sale to a business sale.
Right.
That wherein there was a very profound transfer of responsibility to us that could be monetized. So as an example, at Perimeter, where our competitors were selling something at the time that was $500 a month, ours was $3,000 to $5,000 a month, because we were taking responsibility. And so when the thing went down, we didn't charge them more to get it back up the other guys. They actually got money back. So it's the kind of sucking out the fluff and aligning the business interests to let businesses buy, in the continuity's case, compliance. Like, that's what they want. They don't want someone to tell them about it.
Right.
They want it. Well, it's how do you innovate a delivery mechanism to let them buy what they really want, because they'd never think to ask for it.
Right. More questions for the crowd? I saw some hands raised. Dave, yeah, come on up.
Andy Drew. Maybe a little bit of the philosophy major part of it. So you definitely didn't get the pricing model learning curve down. But what would you say as a high level to entrepreneurs as advice, what you learned from the first big startup to where you are today? Not the details, but as an overall experience.
Yeah. Selling things that people have to touch is way harder than selling things that people don't have to. So Perimeter didn't have a user interface really. It was infrastructure, and so there was no human behavioral change that was needed. Where our current offering, people use it all day every day, and so the idea of having something where people touch it means that there's behavioral change in addition to sort of market consumption. So it's a much more it's a materially different and larger challenge that I did. I certainly didn't have articulated going into it. It's again, you get a big success, and you're like, hey, I know how to do this. Same market. We're selling a SaaS offering. We know all the people, know all the channels, and then fates laugh at you, kick you in the teeth, and which I shared a little bit about in the hiring process. You try and hire. You're like, oh, I got this capital. I want to go hire a big, bright, shiny person who's had a big, bright, shiny success. And the big move is find the humble, because the humble will not assume they know, because every deal, every business, every market has nuances that if you're proud and and you have 30 years of experience, prepare to be beaten and drugged behind a truck, because it happens virtually every time.
Right.
And then there's the one lucky guy.
I was curious about the experience that you give an end user. So the two people that were sitting in the closet worrying about the new regulations, they're now happy sitting at a desktop that has your platform on it,
Yes.
where they can integrate and deliver information on a regular basis. What do you do to sort of keep them happy? Do you spend a lot of time in UX studies and things like that?
Yeah, we do. I think we got some very core pieces right from the beginning, that it's really a very consumer-esque experience, kind of, let's just show people what to do and give them a really clean, direct path. So I think we got a lot of the early thinking right, because when we contemplated, like, okay, there's lots of things, and they're all different at some level, and they change a lot. And so much like Waze or any modern GPS system that has the traffic feedback, right? Like, I don't presume that I know where I'm going. I presume I know nothing and listen to the box tell me when to turn. And that's really where we needed to get compliance, was that people wouldn't presume they knew, because it might change. And so we got that right. But so just to put it in perspective, in 2015, 329 regulatory changes, about 10,000 pages of text from the government. So it's written in this hybrid language of bureaucrat and legalese. So really easy, really approachable. and so there was one issuance that was 603 pages of that. And what our clients experienced was 15 pages that looked like an IKEA manual, like, just do this.
Right.
So what that means is that our clients have a lot more time to be bankers.
Right.
And so what our clients do most with our stuff is not use it, which is fantastic. We have a compliance officer that got 3/4 of her time back. Now she also has accounting reporting into her. So she's elated, because not only does she do her primary job better, but she had a huge career step up, and stories like that over and over and over again. So, and that's what inspires us. We want to decrease the regulatory burden across the industry, so these people can get back to lending to Main Street and doing that, supporting our economy like good bankers should.
Excellent. And how many employees are you now?
45.
That's great.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Stupidly.
Any last questions for Andy before we wrap up? Sorry.
So my name is Joyce.
Hi, Joyce.
So my question is somewhat similar to a question that was posed earlier. So you mentioned that you are philosophy major,
Yes.
right? How did you know that computers was the industry that you should get your business in? And also, what are the steps that you took to acquire the skills that you needed to put a business in place in the computer industry?
Sure. So I'd love to tell you that it was on purpose, but it wasn't. It was, I was a nerdy kid. very introverted kid. So when I found computers, it was like, hey, a toy for smart kids that don't like to talk to people. So just got into that, and then again had the first business was in used high-end stereo equipment. But my partner, I was up in Massachusetts, and my partner was in Maryland, and we had a database that we were sharing over what we later found out was the internet, but we didn't. But we're like, well, hey, like, because we could like we were on the whatever the technology was of the day. I forgot that some terminal thing, and we were on each other's libraries, and we're like, hey. If we can get to each other's libraries, I bet there's a way that we can, connect. And so it's really just, smart kids doing mischief. And so again, with a bunch of, crappy retail jobs, someone said, hey, do you know something about computers and to work at the hospital? I'm like, oh, you mean I get to not be on my feet all day and smell like fried food? That sounds awesome. So I went to work at the hospital, and just doing basic help desk stuff, but again, coming out of a university setting where I was watching modern technology work, I got into the hospital and was shocked because everything was horrible. I mean, profoundly horrible. And one profoundly horrible thing was they were going to connect all the nursing stations back to cardiology and all the places that they need to connect them to, and they were literally going to put in 7 separate computer networks. And I'm like, yeah, like, that's stupid. Like, why don't you put in one? And everyone looked at me like I had 2 heads because I was just this kid out of school who didn't make sense to them. And I ended up conning the guy who was running the project. I said, you know what? We can put in a fiber optic backbone with 100 meg Ethernet and a frame relay network, all running TCP/IP, and we'll have one network, and instead of spending the $900,000 that you're going to spend, you can spend like $250. He said, can you do that? I said, yeah. And so from that day on, I worked my normal 9 to 5 supporting printers and doing help desk work, and worked from 5:30 to 3 in the morning, figuring out how all this stuff worked. And a year later, they had this infrastructure that's still there, and as it turned out, it was an amazing set of skills that were going to be very, very valuable over the coming decade. So it was complete, that's how it happened. Nothing was on purpose. It was more just, I looked at stupidity and said, stupidity can't win, and then decided I could, Norwalk Hospital.
So I'm just trying to think if I had any last. The one thing as a marketer that I just want to comment on, I think is brilliant, is your compliance index that you put together. It's phenomenal. If you have access to data that's normalized and you can prepare it on a regular basis and deliver it to news outlets, they love you. I mean, they just think you're awesome.
You do their job for them.
You're doing their job for them, and then especially because you can show it month over month, year over year, and I assume you guys get credit for it within the.
Oh yeah. No, and it was our 3rd try at it. So we tried a couple of different other numbers, and they didn't work, but this one stuck. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, so that's a lesson for the marketers out there. Last question. Yep.
While you're walking up, I just want to add that the idea came from Bob Dorff.
Oh, really?
He told me about how the top steakhouse things in the airport magazines. Those are just those steakhouses get together and write top steakhouses and list themselves. like it's completely fabricated. So it was him doing that. I'm like, okay, I got to come up with my own thing.
Oh, that's funny. Bob Dorff gets the credit.
I guess I have kind of 2 questions. One is what is your marketing and business development now? Do you have salespeople that are calling banks and all that? And then besides that, so how hard is, you said people have to use this software? Mm-hmm. So is this what's the learning curve to that? Is it similar to somebody using QuickBooks or harder than that or whatever? How can you switch mics?
Sure. Okay. So we sell with a direct model right now. We have an inside sales crew. The marketing, we do a ton of content marketing. So the quarterly index comes out. We have a webinar on that. Typically 10 to 15% of the industry shows up. Increasingly, the examiners themselves are showing up. And so that leads to, then each, we cherry pick, regulatory issuances, then we have separate webinars on those. So there's this content stream of about 12 different webinars, and corresponding newsletters and white papers and all that stuff. So the leads just kind of fall off of that process into the sales queue and work our way through them there. There's an inside sales crew of 4 people, so it's good. And the other question was, right? Yes, yeah. Thank you. So it's quite easy. Again, when it was the Death Star, it was really hard because they had to kind of wrap their head around all of the things simultaneously. Where now, as an example for the regulatory change management, it's like, well, you get an email when there's a change. Log in and you see it on your screen. And then you read it and you click the next button. So our deployment, it's typically about 3 days to turn a client up, and that's 3 days of an hour each. So very easy. We do a lot with a product called WalkMe, which basically lets you do these overlays over screen so we know that a user is coming to the screen for the first time. So we go, this is this, and this, we've all seen those things. Excuse me, absolutely huge. Contextual learning about stuff versus a training course kind of thing has been a huge win for us in terms of traction, because one of the big challenges just in terms of getting up to speed with software as a service is when your champion who bought your stuff leaves the company, and then all of a sudden someone new is like, what the hell is this? And they didn't go through your boarding cycle because they weren't there. So it's those kinds of things have been great learning for us, that you got to contextualize your learning, and then you have to instrument your software so that you know when these things change. So for us, when the compliance officer's name changes, that's a trigger to get them out, sort of a re-education process. And
yeah, that's a great lesson. I mean, in software especially, there's it's so easy to replace something.
Yep.
You find someone. A lot of the great companies will just keep on selling, even though a solution's been selected.
Right.
And you need to be sticking on your game. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I want to give Andy a real great thank you for being here. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's an inspiring story, and we're so delighted you shared with it. We can't wait to hear bigger and bigger success for you. So
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hope to deliver.
Okay. Thanks.